Hello, everyone. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And welcome to my co hosts, Thomas and Vignesh.
Hello.
And before we start with a short introduction, usually we are four faces here in this screen, in this stream. But today, Raphael has another emergency appointment. Meeting, what the emergency. That so he cannot attend, or maybe we'll join later. So we thought we still have plenty to talk about, and once we are healthy to talk again, we thought we should share it. All right, Thomas, would you like to start with a short introduction?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Thomas. So I'm an architect, especially, and MVP to Microsoft Teams, really focusing on merger and acquisitions, especially therefore to the cross-tenant migrations. Wrote a couple of ebooks free on SlideShare that I will share it for Teams again. And happy having you in the broader round today again.
Thank you. So, Vignesh, up to you.
All right. Hey, everyone. So this is Vignesh Ganeshan here. So if you're following this video series, so yes, I've been a Microsoft MVP for 1 year now, hoping that I get renewed. And I've been working on the M365 space for almost my entire career, I would say for almost 12 plus years now. And yeah, so speaking about this tenant-to-tenant migration, these are some projects which I actively participate in as a part of my day-to-day work, and I'm here to share some of my learnings here. Thank you.
Perfect. And now, last but not least, myself. I'm the guy who actually has the most of the experience, not with the general migration from one tenant to the other, but talking and dealing with users. So, user adoption is one of my main topics. I'm also a consultant for Microsoft 365 in general with Teams focus. And especially today, there are two different topics which are very interesting. And I was already involved and had some interesting discussions already. So I'm looking forward to talk about Collab data to continue the last conversation, but also talk about telephony. And I would like to continue the conversation about the data, just to complete it. And if I'm correct, we had to complete the part with mail migration. Am I correct?
Yep.
Okay. So before we get deep into this topic, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to put it in the chat. We will talk about this and raise your question as well during the conversation. So, mail. What can go wrong if you have two different tenants and you want to migrate from one to the other? What could possibly go wrong? What are the most affected parts, I would say? It's an easy one. Who would take it?
So to speak, everything, everything goes wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, coming back a little, not just the killing thing, but there's a couple of things before maybe Vignesh takes a lot more is, let's see it first is we have issues for sure by splitting domains. That means if you have an SMTP domain, it can't yet be hosted across multiple tenants. Why I say can't host it yet, it's in a private preview, but public on the Microsoft Learning page already. By the way, you should follow it because most likely every 2 weeks it receives an update. I even checked it today and it's a much larger article already. Not getting easier, but more complicated, but at least it's there. And they even ask you for that private preview join. Another thing which is definitely always a part, completely underestimated, and sometimes maybe you don't need it, is like the frame busy thing. So like having a look into the calendar, even calendar sharing, and how to identify if your secretary is left or right, if we should take her along or if you want to get rid of her. These are most likely always the things which are going wrong. One thing further, Sure, we spoke about throttling, yes, and if you believe it or not, Exchange is auto throttled, so you cannot move everything as fast as you can. But here comes the good news. At least over the service portal in M365, you can just ask for an exemption so that throttling is lifted, not removed. But therefore, you can get some terabytes at least over into the other data center. And I think that are the most interesting parts, if we talk about the user side, and maybe later we can talk a little bit more about shared mailboxes, and I'm talking about not only shared, but maybe we can talk also about group mailboxes and the services attached, because you cannot just tear a complete group apart. So Teams there, SharePoint here, and Exchange, I don't know, anywhere else. So you can, but it would not be helpful for the users, and it actually also do not fully work as expected. So that was, I guess, the first overview. It's not scary. It's the most easiest part actually to migrate, but considerations are always on the plate. Organization.
Yep. I totally agree with your point, Thomas. So, yeah, you briefly touched upon some important points. So my comment on this, or what I would like to start with, is basically the prerequisites for doing a mail migration. Because if you look at the plethora of services that we have in the Microsoft 365, I think for whatever reason, it doesn't matter how many other effective communication services Microsoft comes up with, by nature, or by the way we have been working for quite some time, mail is always super important for us. I mean, that's the first app that you would open when you open your laptop every day in the morning, right? So if you're looking at prerequisites, what I would begin up with is, uh, you know to run some surveys, maybe to ask the users to clean up old emails. And this is just not the case for email. It could be for other services also, wherein you're asking your users to clean up old stuff, because you don't necessarily want to bring in emails which are 5 years old or 10 years old, or even like 3 years old for that matter, right? So, but if they still want it, maybe they can back it up to an offline PST in their PC and keep it. But I don't really see a necessity to migrate all those old emails, because it's simply going to take a lot of time, and the migration timeline is going to get expanded accordingly. And then the different mailbox types. So, of course, Thomas said we'll be talking about shared mailbox and groups later, but it's also good to identify the different mailbox types that you want to migrate. It could be you want to do user mailbox, shared mailbox, maybe distribution groups, Microsoft 365 groups, or maybe resource mailboxes. And there is a lot. There are different type of mailboxes. It is just not about user mailbox, because there are a lot of mailboxes types out there, and you need to really have a plan, or you need to really identify what are the things that you need to migrate. And also, once you've identified this, maybe another prerequisite is to identify what are the different mailbox components that you would need to migrate. And this is all completely based on the business need, right? Because some customers might say that I want my mails, I want the calendar items, I want tasks, I want notes, I want rules, the delegation rights. So everything, whatever the users have done, I want everything to be migrated to the target. Ideally, when things are getting that complicated, it's going to get a lot more tougher. But you don't really need to worry, because today there are always solutions available for that to take care of that. So, on a very high level, if you're talking about prerequisite, I would say so. Identifying these things and very early in the project is very, very important. So, what's your take on that, Thomas and Michael?
Yes, we have even one point completely again forgotten. My most loved and hated thing, by the way, I always forget. There could be contacts existing in the source and in the target tenant across. So that means, there need to be even a process in place, especially when you just flip the mailbox. So that means the primary one should be the target. I mean, that's an easy thing to handle. You can just export it, compare it, and change it, and you know how that works in the rollout. It's not complicated, but very often forgotten. So you assign the mailbox. Oops, there was already a contact in place, so it can't work. And furthermore, there's one part, I think we do not need to discuss it in that real technical detail, but Exchange, beside of Active Directory, is one of the most services where you find hybrid setups. So there will be always something on premises. It could be even something left over, like just only an SMTP relay host or anything like that.
Yeah.
And that's the pain in the behind. Because there is one thing you need to see, beside of migrating the mails and having the users, you also want to reply on mails. And however it looks like when you migrate it, there is something like called that X500 legacy exchange DN address. I guess everyone has heard about it. And you need to work on a solution so that at least you can just continue replying on mails, especially also internally. And if you are having a hybrid environment, it's easy if the target environment wouldn't be hybrid, because then you can simply forget about it. But on the other hand, if the target, and most likely the mergers have something hybrid, you need to find out a solution as well on the user migration approach within the Active Directory, not Azure, the Active Directory. So Active Directory, first think about the Exchange attributes, see how a mailbox will be enabled. Is it a mailbox which is remote in the cloud? Is it on-prem? And it will be shifted to the cloud. It all has an impact, and especially that's the words X500 legacy DN, and you have to repeat it again, X500 legacy DN name, because that's super important. And here it comes again. Next hassle. If you change it and it looks different, and the approach is just also in a hybrid setup, but you actually want to send a mail on or continue on a mail thread, it could be that on the opposite tenant, exchange protection will actually think, oops, that looks different. Different means that is not actually a valid mail. At least it is a mail, but it would end up in your junk mail folder. By the way, you can't do anything against it. That will be one part of it. So testing, building it, testing it, testing it, and testing it again until stable. Then go back, and then we come to the topic of Michael, actually, which is then the user adoption, change in adoption. Next part, whatever you are going to do, if it's a hybrid environment or not, if it's semi-hybrid or if it's cloud only, there are different behaviors, and the user definitely need to understand not only how it works until he's migrated, how he can deal with data, but furthermore is also, he also there needs to know, is my user and source or target? That means I want to, so the counterpart where you want to send a mail, because again, next thing is whatever you have migrated, there's Teams behind, and Teams uses a SIP address equal to mail address. That means again, that can also break. It is not related to a cross-tenant migration directly, but to user adoption. So that means, how does it look like? Do I see the green bubble, red bubble? Yes or no? And is my account, by the way, migrated together, jointly together with Teams? Yes or no? And as always, a good advice, user services, please, please, please cut over at the same day. You can't work across two tenants. Oh yeah, user adoption, definitely a part.
Always.
I do have a question when you talk about all the old data. Does it make sense to start with an archive? So you just decide to create an archive. I don't know, the last, and you just keep the last year in the active mailbox and then start the migration from there?
Yep. Ideally, if you look at an effective way of doing it, that would be the recommended practice, because I don't think anything lesser than a year is really important. I mean, I'm just trying to be very realistic, right? But of course, there could be important mails which are like 2 years old or 3 years old. So ideally, in any migration, maybe it always makes sense to go ahead and do cleanup. If your organization has a very good retention policy for emails, then that is already taken care of, because they already start getting deleted. But if not, it's a good practice to either back it up or delete it, or whatever form of cleanup. And then maybe once the new Outlook profile comes up, then they can attach the PST once again if the user needs it. But trying to migrate everything is simply going to cost a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort. It's the whole 9 yards. Yeah.
It's the topic of, and too bad Raphael today it's not here.
Yeah.
It's a topic of GDPR. So it means like if we are having legal requirements, archiving requirements or whatever else, still they need to be taken into consideration. And that brings us as well to another point, is how you deal with legal hold again here. Legal hold is generally always the advice topic of talk to the legal department. What do they require? That's one part. And then based on their statements, you only can file it. But again, how less data you migrate, how better it is. Nevertheless, domain sharing, SMTP sharing, whatever I've explained already in the private preview, that's also similar to OneDrive at the moment. So Microsoft has announced it officially that also a kind of mailbox move will be there in the near future. And at least that gives, or maybe the pain in the behind, so to speak, of the data transfer is then left behind. On the other hand, when we deal with geolocations and whatever else, it might work or it might break. You never know. You will see it on the next morning whenever you migrate. And then you can be happy to tell the users, oh, sorry, your scheduled migration broke. Not our fault.
Exactly. Yeah. Totally makes sense.
One part, because Michael was at the MVP summit right now. So what I've actually seen since I did a go to US, there was no session about cross-tenant migrations at all, no services anymore. Did you got anything?
I can neither agree or disagree. No, actually, overall, you have seen just a few sessions about Exchange in general, and it doesn't matter which event. So if you talk about the Ignite events, there has maybe 1 or 2 Exchange sessions. And on the other hand, we had a Microsoft Exchange conference last year, the MAC. And the MAC was actually a community event with a little bit of future insights, or how the product group explained what are the plans for Exchange. And I think there is no big leap anymore for Exchange itself. That makes it easier for the product group to bring up some services like this migration pass. And you mentioned it already. It's in private preview, and it will be in public preview, I think, at the end of the year. So that was the announcement from at the beginning of the year, where the official tech community article has been released. It was really interesting to see a public article about a private preview, just to help the user to understand where Microsoft is working on this topic. And Microsoft will bring up some more intention to implement more services and help for at least the admins for the migration.
Maybe that is a part of why they put something on the public web page of a private preview, which actually means there's a lot of tenant-to-tenant migration going on. At the moment, I'm even integrating 3 different companies into one tenant. But on the other hand, if you compare it to the growth of other cloud services, that's really a meaner but very special kind of topic. So most likely that's why they are looking even for smaller tenants. They would always love to have a migration of a very large tenant, but don't do it. That is something where I always say, don't do it. You work, because you work with the product group, and we had this as well. They work in their local time, which means like Redmond time zone. Pretty bad for Germany, because you can only start working with them at 6 or 7 p.m. our local time, or hope they wake up early. So that means it is very difficult from our perspective. And even if you're in Asia, it's still the same. So you'll never ever work at their shifts. And that's why you need to still, or they need to still find people who are willing to help and support them, and help and support them during a very critical migration between tenants, that is somehow controversial in itself. But it works. We did it too. So it was nice. It was a hassle, but it was helpful at the same time. So which means it's a painful happiness, so to speak.
Yeah, totally get it. And another important factor or important topic, I think at least not one, two, that we can't get away with when we are doing an email migration. And Thomas, I believe you already spoke about this earlier a few minutes back. So one is the email address rewrite, and next is the meeting link migration. Every time it comes when you're doing an email topic, right? So what are your comments? And you rightly said, so the concept of having a domain being shared with two different tenants. A lot of us wants it, but I still believe Microsoft is telling that it's coming. It's still not yet there, which is why you start to need to look at some third-party service providers such as Quest. But then we all know that they come with a cost, right? Um, so how do you think that we should overcome these challenges when organizations, and this could be for whatever reasons they want, right? So it could be their own business reasons, legal reasons, or whatever it is. But any customer who's going through a merger and acquisition, they always keep asking that we want the email address rewrite, and then the other piece is the meeting link migration.
Yeah. Maybe let me start. No, with both. Actually, both is same important. What I would guess is, I mean, even companies like Quest, BitTitan, Skykick, and whatever is there. So to just name only a few ones, they will definitely integrate the Microsoft native tools, migration tools as well. So it would be very helpful if it could be initiated, maintained, and kicked off anyhow a migration from within one single migration tool. On the other hand, there are things where I think Microsoft even can't do it, because I would not know how they should do it technically, beside of completely messing the mailbox if you shift it simply. That is the meeting link migration, because Teams itself creates that fancy long identifier on a meeting. And it will have coding of the initiator tenant, so of the tenant who actually hosts the meeting. And therefore, yes, for sure, that means this meeting needs to be deleted and a new meeting needs to be created. That's the easy word, actually. But if we even shift it, so if we reattach, there need to be still a process. Either Microsoft is programming something, or it will be still the third-party provider, which runs through the entire mailbox, and that you can only do after the entire mailbox has been migrated fully and becomes active, so the primary mailbox. Then you run into the calendar, or you look into the calendar and identify all meetings where you are the initiator and it has a Teams meeting attached. What you need to do then, or maybe what the solutions at the moment do, and that's the only solution which you can do, because other people you have invited, especially not within the same tenant, but in another tenant, you cannot simply trickle inside of their emails and change a calendar entry. So that means they definitely need to have a new meeting link invite. And how you can get it, you cannot simply update it, because, as I said, legacy DN, other things, and so on. Remember, you do not address the same mail, that you can send them an update. That means you receive a cancellation at the same time you receive a re-invite. And here we are again on that side of user adoption. You can talk for sure between two companies merging, but it's very difficult to communicate that externally. So that means now you send someone, say you have a critical, maybe not so nice customer who always complains. We are in Germany, right? I have to be careful what I say. Now you send them a meeting cancellation and re-invite. At the same time, he just picks up the phone and just calls you, because they are not using Teams. And then he starts shouting like, why you cancel the meeting, why you re-invite me, and so on. Then you need to explain him, if you would have read the messages in the press, you will see that we are just in a merger and acquisition scenario, and that we are ... But that means, again, we need to be very careful how we do it. Do we do it automatically, or do we tell each and every one in the company, you have to do it? What will be the result if they don't, or if we do not use the tool? There's a meeting, someone clicks on, and all end up in the lobby. Or even worse, the tenant is already decommissioned, so they end up in nowhere. So that's why that are the, or on the other hand, these are the parts which we need to always consider. And there is more than only the technical. It's not simply moving it into a different environment, but also telling someone where it is, what to do, what to expect, what will be happen, why it will be happen, and finding the balance of this explanation. That's not that easy. And if you communicate too less, they complain and don't know what is going on. If you communicate too much, they don't read and start the same process. I've not ever seen the golden path, so to speak, in the middle. It is always something, and address it. I mean, most best is always to tell it is not easy, it is not hassle-free, it is necessary for the company, and do something and talk outside too. We are going to shift and migrate. Everyone did it with a rebrand. It is a rebrand, even if you keep the same DNS domains, but it's a kind of rebrand. And who remember how was that thing with the two chocolate sticks called before today Twix? It was Hyder. And it took, I don't know how many years to forget about Hyder before you talk about Twix. And it was massive investment in marketing. So that means we still need to see what kind of investment we are taking. And don't talk about the fancy migration of a few million euros, where we have something to do with the users, where they need to work, where we have to have vendors, where we have customers, and so on. And then you talk about, say, something like 6-7 million euros for a migration, but they bought the company for 1 billion. It's nothing.
Yep.
So do not save on that part. There are impacts. You need a lot of budget for marketing, besides internal and external marketing. It is not smooth. It is a rebrand. It's something changes, and that needs to be spoken out. It's not keep it quiet and secret, and then wonder why you receive this and that.
Absolutely. And thank you for this short description. Was multiple times during the explanations telling me, "Amen, yes, absolutely, that's for sure." So I will skip for now the user adoption repeating here, and I would like to raise the question to Vignesh. You opened the discussion by telling us there are more than just the user mailboxes to consider.
Yeah.
But what are the other ones? I heard them, but what are the issues with all these resource mailboxes, calendars from group mailboxes maybe as well?
Yeah. I think, yeah, definitely. So, because every time when you talk, as I said in the beginning, right? So when we think about mailbox, it's just not a mailbox attached to an individual, like a person, to a human alone. That could be a lot of other mailboxes also. So one such kind that I could think of is a resource mailbox. Um, I mean, back in the days, there was this concept called as resource mailbox. I'm not sure whether that's still the case, but specifically, maybe if you're trying to use a Teams meeting room, right, an MTR. So basically, you would have this resource mailbox concept. And in addition to that, you also have a shared mailbox wherein, as the name itself says, it's a mailbox which are shared by multiple users, so that everybody, whomever is in that shared mailbox, they get emails, and you could also reply on behalf of that mailbox. So as the name itself says, it's a shared mailbox. And then you have a distribution group, DL. Basically, as the name itself says, it's a DL. It's an address wherein a couple of people have been added to, and if you send an email to that DL, so everybody in that DL receives an email. Then you have the other kind called as Microsoft 365 groups, because if you look at Microsoft 365 groups, it's sort of a, I like to call it as a toolbox, because it has a lot of things inside it. It has the SharePoint, it has the an email piece attached to it, a mailbox attached to it, then it has a planner attached to it, and then there are a lot of other things. It has a Yammer attached to it, right? So that is also, as I said, that is a mailbox which is part of a Microsoft 365 group. So these are all the different kind of mailboxes which organizations are actively using. And when you're migrating these, so the migration itself is pretty much similar to how you would do a user mailbox. But then after migrating, there are quite some tasks that you need to do. For instance, if you're looking at a shared mailbox, after you have migrated, it so happens that maybe is all the persons having the same amount of access, or is it something break after after it got migrated? Maybe there were 10 people who had access to the shared mailbox in the source, and now after migrating it's only 5 people, and maybe the remaining 5 people didn't even make it. So those kind of permission challenges are there, even distribution groups, right? So those kind of permissions. And a resource mailbox, as I said, I'm not sure whether it's still a thing, but you of course see a lot of organizations making use of it specifically for MTR scenarios. And specifically if you're having auto attendant and other scenarios, this comes into picture. So these are all the different type of mailboxes which I think organizations should keep in mind. And it also comes with discovery, because when you're talking to the exchange architect or whomever is responsible for managing exchange in itself, so they should have these numbers upfront, and it's always better to come up with a plan of how we are going to migrate this. But the migration itself, the procedure is similar to how you would migrate the user mailbox. So that's my take on it. And Thomas, do you want to add something to that?
Hold on a
Maybe
second.
a little bit.
Yeah.
I just want to ask
Okay.
something.
Sure.
What about room mailboxes? For example, when you try to book a room,
Hmm.
these are resource mailboxes. Am I right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so no special type. It's basically the same, and I think this is also
Yes,
for room booking.
exactly.
If you have a physical room, and yes, we forget this all about the pandemic, but we still have
Exactly.
some rooms.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
What happens,
Got
for
it.
example, if you have an auto end zone?
Yeah.
So that means you have to configure something if the user is in the other tenant. So if you want to still book the room, you need to know where it is, where it can be found. If it's in source, if it's in target. And even then, if you know where it is, say it is still in source, but you're in target, then you invite the room, and then the room actually see, oh, you booked it already. So again, legacy and so on. I don't want to repeat it, but on the other hand, now you are external. That means you are someone else. And that also needs to be considered. Is it acceptable? Do you have a moderator and whatever else? On the other hand, yes, we spoke about it, and I called it always communication clusters or communication bubbles, so to speak, which means like if you have a distribution group, if you have a shared mailbox, have whatever else, even if you have a resource mailbox like a room mailbox, yes, you can have a look who most likely is going to use it, and you can migrate those resources jointly together. If that works or not is something else. If you have time and you make it for users, again, the migration, and you care about them, yes, you do it, but your migration will definitely take much longer. That's one part. On the other hand, let me talk about a little project which I've never seen in my life before. So that means like if you allow chaos in a tenant, yes, go ahead. But how do you deal with 10,000 users and 17,000 mail-enabled groups, or mailbox-enabled groups, or M365 groups? That means talking about a communication cluster. That doesn't work. And you won't find it. That means everyone is everywhere.
Exactly.
So you need to make a cut. You need to make a decision. It's painful for the users, but learn of that mistakes. Do you honestly need more groups than actually users?
Users,
I've
yeah.
never ever seen that before. I just got shocked. I said, okay, you made a mistake. You have 17,000 users, 10,000 groups. I can live with it. No, honestly, it was opposite. So that means finding or working on communication clusters, it's possible. It's not impossible. So it's like an 80-20 rule, 80%, maybe you can make 20% never ever. But also it comes back to the same point, clear up your environment. Look what's not in use,
Exactly.
clear it up. You will find something and maybe export it, make a very big bucket and shift that bucket and put it anywhere else. Put it in your storage room, wherever, but make it possible for the users again.
Yeah, I think that's where Michael's expertise come into picture because speaking and the point that you mentioned, Thomas. So as a part of adoption, also comes very strong governance, also, right? So because I remember in the beginning, like few years back, when Microsoft 365 Groups or Teams was introduced, and I hope Michael you would agree, many organizations came up with the strong governance policies where they said we don't want every user creating teams or groups. It will be only with IT. You raise a request to us, you come to us, we'll validate whether you need it, and then we'll create one. So this pretty much avoided all these duplicate groups or teams. But the moment they said, okay, we don't want to do this, we give users to do, create teams, I think it became chaos. It became a wildfire. Everybody started to create. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a hard learning, to be honest. Because the first explanation from Microsoft was, now you have a tool where everyone can work as they would like to work. So no matter how IT would like to restrict, you restrict the ways how they could work. The initial idea from Microsoft was, hey, now use Teams. You can just go ahead. You have your overall policies, your overall compliance and security boundaries. So you're good to go. Just let them do whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
And then everyone figured out that's a horrible idea because you have a ton of old teams, you have a ton of different teams with different names.
Yeah.
And beside the teams, you always have a SharePoint site in the background. You always have a Office 365 and now Microsoft 365 group behind that. That makes it really hard to understand what are the naming conventions, how does it look like in your Azure Active Directory on the SharePoint side from the admin perspective. So yes, every IT nowadays knows they have to specify all these things, communicate, bring some self-services in the best case, and allow the user still do everything they want, but in boundaries.
Yeah.
You are in control of your IT, so you have to set these boundaries.
Let me
And
make a joke. Now I know why I have 40 laptops at home. Every time I don't find my laptop, I go and buy a new one.
yes, so
Yeah.
that's quite easy, right? And you have to be the person who explains it to the user as well. So you have to describe it. And when we talk about any tenant-to-tenant migration, you have some other limitations, and you have to talk about this.
Yeah.
The communication part, as you said, is very important. And I would like to use this easy hint, I would say, to go to our next topic. Except you want to add something very important here, but we have 20 minutes left, and I think that will be tough for telephony.
It's actually not that tough.
It's not, because you just turn it off, or what's the solution?
You simply turn it off. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay,
No.
now we're done. Bye.
Okay, great. So voice is not what we need. Let me actually see. Michael can do this. I just provide the share as well, so then we can even definitely shortcut it a little bit, because I have the tenant-to-tenant migration ebook ready for Teams, so which is only focusing about Teams. Okay, let's have a quick discussion, as I did this with Tom Abenuth as well for a couple of weeks ago, and it can go fast. Okay, how many possibilities for voice we have? Okay, we have Teams-to-Teams communication. That is something default, so not necessary actually to do any migration, because that's a basic functionality and do not need to be configured at all.
Yeah.
But if we are talking about enterprise voice, we have a couple of things possible. So One solution is choose a provider, which is Microsoft. So that means like you have something called calling plans.
Yep.
I'm not talking about the licensing behind it, but Microsoft is your provider, and a calling plan can be migrated between tenants. That works. And if you deal very, very kindly and very, very friendly together with Microsoft, they also allow you individual phone number migration from within a single number block. What's a number block? So like if you're sitting in Munich and you have an area code of 089, you have the main phone number 5555, and you bought a block of 1000 numbers, which means 5555 and then 0000 till 9999. All these numbers are yours. That's one number block, for example. And if you are going to migrate with Microsoft calling plans, you can either choose, if you have number blocks which are in a close range, to just tell Microsoft, I'm going to migrate tomorrow evening at that time. Please ensure the phone number is migrated. Normally, you do this with a porting request in the Microsoft portal. You give them an Excel sheet with all the numbers, the proposed migration date. You can get in touch with them. Important, very, very, very important topic onto this is the porting teams are country-wise or regional-wise in a local time zone. Porting will only occur in the normal working hours. So that means if you're working in Germany and you need to port something in US, they are awake in the US. And even in the US, they have a couple of regions that needs to be taken into consideration. But then it works very easy and straightforward, meaning you migrate the user, it has the phone number assigned, the license is assigned, the phone number will be again available in the tenant. Therefore, you just disconnect the phone, the user is migrated, then porting has occurred, you assign the phone number and license again, and everything works. This is super simple and easy. Then we come to another topic. And this topic is actually if we have the direct routing. Direct routing means you operate your owned session border controllers, or, and that's the other option, there is something like Operators Connect and Operators Connect. Actually, it's a pretty simple, straightforward part because it's the same like the normal direct routing, only it's a managed SPC. And then let's see how you can deal with it. If it's your own and you have professional session border controllers, then you can modify routing on the session border controller. So that means, again, one session border controller is most likely connected to a certain internal device. Could be a PBX, call center, anything else. It is also connected with your provider directly into the public PSTN, and for sure it is connected to the source, which means it's connected to M365. That's the simple setup, but you own it. And if you see this picture Michael is sharing already, you are doing routing, and that's great. You are doing routing. So at least you know where an incoming call, for example, should be routed. Should it be routed to an existing call center PBX, or should it be routed into Teams? Now we start thinking logic about it. If I know this one, I definitely also can decide there is a second tenant. Now put up a routing table and say, for example, user A, or the phone number, because not the user, but the phone number A explicitly is now in the target tenant. That works. If you're now assuming you're migrating 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 users a day, that's a lot of work. That does not make sense. If you could spare work, do it. And then we have an idea. Let me get this idea entirely. A session border controller can be connected through different SIP targets. So you have the operator, it's one, PSTN. Say a contact center, say you have a PBX, say you have a fax system, you have a DECT system, whatever else, and you have a tenant. Why not connect a second tenant? Right? That's what you do in hosting as well. You have one customer, tenant A, you have another customer, tenant B. You deal with number blocks. and number blocks can be routed to a dedicated destination. At the same port, now here it comes. If I have two tenants connected, how SIP is actually going to work? SIP is sending at the very first a signaling. So that means it just address to a destination, hey, here is a phone number. I want to set up a call. That's all what is happening at the beginning. And by the way, you can do this to multiple locations. That means multiple destination. It is called, you remember from earlier sessions, it's called dual forking. So that means I can send signaling messages to various locations. And various locations, destinations, actually means I could also do it in 2 or 3 tenants, right? That is the way. What would the tenant do if the phone number is not configured? Not exist. So that means, like, I'm talking really about it's not assigned to a user. Then the signaling was sent to the tenant. The tenant is looking into it. Oh, I don't know the phone number at this boundaries of the tenant, and would send you back the so-called 404 destination not found, which means the phone number is not assigned. If I do it now with 2 tenants and send one call into the source and target, I will always receive 144, user not found or phone number not found, and the other one, it's starting with the ringing process because it found the number. Now I only need to do one part, since I always get or receive 2 messages. And if I receive a message of 404, I could simply drop this message. So that means I tell the session border controller, don't take care about the 404 message coming from this destination or that destination. Drop it. Then a couple of milliseconds later, from the other tenant, it's coming back ringing. And then you know, yes, it's there. If it's a second message on 404, you can simply do it and say, okay, now I could just also signal that the number is not found. Else you can let it run into a timeout. Nothing will be happen. So that means address the same phone number simply on your core session border controller. The core session border controller is always the session border controller connected with M365. Point it to source, point it to target, do a proper setup. But one super important part is you can use one single certificate, but you can't address it via the same IP address. That means you need to have a second IP address, which you connect to the target tenant. So you leave the configuration as it is for the source. You add a new IP address, you add a new virtual SIP network port, and connect that one with maybe the same certificate and additional SAN names, so the subject alternative names, to the target tenant. That works. That's always completely fine. And still you have a little bit more load on your session border controller. So if that is beeping out of the last hole, as we speak and say in German, which means if it really is on a high consistent load, maybe you need to consider either getting another one or maybe upgrading the models to do so. But again, you're only in a migration for voice. Then you migrate the user, you activate the license in target, you remove the phone number in source, you assign the phone number in the target, and you're done. And that is instantly working with the little delay on phone number reassignment and removals. But probably after 15 minutes, the user has its phone number back and can receive and send or set calls to the PSD. And that is, honestly spoken, that easy. We have done that one at multiple customers. It is working super fine, super smooth. I found security bugs when we initiated this idea with Microsoft together. All are fixed. By the way, they fixed it in less than 24 hours and made also this kind of migration solution for telephony the standard one. So my last sentence, so that we can stay this time really within the 60 minutes, the 1 hour call is, if you have an operators connect, that means like it's definitely a session border controller hosted by one of your providers. If you do not switch the provider and it would be the same provider, then yes, talk to him, tell him what he must do. I mean, it is easy, else you just terminate it, use your own, and then you can just give it back, use a provider as well. Maybe sometimes they have professional services, do it with a consulting company, however, and that works. If, for example, the target tenant has operators connect, but here it comes, they do not have the same provider as in the source tenant, you need to do a so-called phone number porting, similar to the calling plans. Talk to them. That will definitely take longer than on the Microsoft side. The fastest possible porting they do between providers is at least 24 hours. And then you need to decide what you can stand. So can you turn off telephony, enterprise telephony for dedicated user for 1, 2, or 3 days? Or do you need to do all the migrations, for example, on the weekend? That's a very important part. Okay, 2 more sentences. Call queues. Call queue migration works for telephony or for phone numbers. So for the telephony option, the same way. You can easily do it. What does not work and probably will also not being developed by Microsoft, even if we had a discussion 2 years ago, if you have a call queue, you must migrate everyone in that call queue at the same time. There is no things like a call queue could work between 2 different tenants. And that means if you have a call queue which simulates a contact center, take all users, schedule them, move them over with all the M365 services, including voice, including call queue. Set it up again. You can't migrate a call queue, so it's just export settings and import it again. It's pretty straightforward, goes pretty fast. It's more the analytics behind. That's it. That means even if I talk fast and maybe did that in less than 12 minutes, I guess, the work behind is still a lot that you do not need or don't underestimate, even if we talk fast. And it looks very simple. You need to reprogram session border controllers. You need to find, you must find communication clusters based, for example, on call queues. And that is also valid, definitely valid if you have calling plans. Call queue users go together. Wherever, if you have it on the portings part, think about it again. Microsoft works in local time zones. And if you have international call queues, there will be certain downtime. You can't avoid it. It's based on just the Microsoft contracts working behind. If you have a provider, depends also on if you have it under your own control. Even then, you might have certain downtime depending on how you schedule across the different regions. Rated.
Yep, I think you
Read the
pretty
document.
much summarized everything. I also want to get your advice, Thomas, on is I think when you're dealing with devices, a hard reset would be required, right? When I say devices, these fancy Android, Microsoft certified, phones, which are enrolled to Intune. So, and even these, they need to be unenrolled from this source and they have to be re-enrolled into the target, right? So I think they would require a hard reset, or else they'll be re-enrolling back.
It depends a little bit on. So certain phones which you have attached, the process behind in Teams is actually the same, but just taking care of them. If they in Intune, unenroll, re-enroll, reconfigure, done. It's important. Most likely you have someone aside that works better together over Ethernet. Phones work like this. This is not a problem because they're attached to Teams. That works. If you have MTRs or other conferencing solutions as well, yes, you will most likely reconfigure them if you have hundreds of them. Maybe you have a vendor-based solution for management. So a management solution for MPRs is still pretty common. Then you can actually deal with this and assign it again. But also here, it depends on if you shift it and depending on whom you invited, how you did it, who sent it out, did you some parts on behalf. It touches again both Teams, voice, exchange.
Yep.
So it means also for all those special components or common area phones, same. Get that all together, see what you can do, see how you can manage them, because it's not the user, it's not the computer which you migrate, which we are doing also in another session. But even if I'm connected to another tenant, everything is there because the settings come from the tenant, done. If you have the phone, a lot of things are coming from the tenant, but at least you need to tell the phone where is the target, what's the new sign, how to find it. And that's why I say it's possible as well. Phone or telephony itself, not that complicated, but you need good engineers. If you have ribbon, audio codes, whatever, it's easy for someone who is really dealing with enterprise session border controllers. It works also on a million 1000 the ribbon 1000 system. That works. That's all fine. That goes along. It also works, by the way, with if you have in Azure software-based session border controller, because it's still the same. It all works fine. Telephony itself, it's not against any kind of border within the frame of Microsoft, even if it is in Azure. But again, you need to have someone who supports the session border controllers pretty well.
Yep.
2 minutes left.
Yep. That was a good explanation also for the different scenarios you have with telephony and Microsoft. And thank you. Thank you for today. Thank you, Vignesh.
Yep.
Thank you, Thomas. I would like to use the last minute to give you an idea for our next session, because today Raphael was not here. We will talk about legal security and compliance the whole session next time we meet in 2 weeks. So yeah, I'm looking forward to learn more about these different aspects. We already heard about these points during the different sessions when we had a specific topic. So you can watch the other episodes as well, so you get an idea about personal data, the first part of Collab data already, so OneDrive and SharePoint, also from the legal perspective and the compliance perspective. But there's more, and we want to cover this as well. And I'm also happy to announce another colleague who will join us in 3 episodes, I think, 2 or 3 episodes. So at the end of May or June, I'm not sure about the schedule actually, but we will announce it. So please subscribe. I always miss this English word. Subscribe and you will have a notification there.
Thumb up.
And yeah, of course, like and share and comment for the algorithm, all these things. And yeah, he will talk about devices. So I'm really looking forward to this specific topic, because this is not an easy one. And yes, that's it from our side for this time. Looking forward to see you in 2 weeks, and goodbye.
Right.
Nice evening, wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Bye.